we had an event on the 17th and had Dr. Vic Uzumeri present the TUID, the Transport Unit Identifier, as a solution for the industry to really enable digitalization to occur effectively. And so happy to have him back with us. We didn't have time for Q&A at the end of the last event. And so not only have we brought back Dr. Vic, but we have Joe Lynch back with us with Logistics of Logistics podcast. And the two new faces that you see belong to Andrew Cohen, who has joined us to really be able to lay out the steps of bringing in standards to an industry, because he participated in doing that for the airline industry. And we're at a point in time where that needs to occur for the dynamic freight matching industry and for supply chains. And we know that standards are important, which is why we also have John Greaves with us, who has been instrumental in standards creation globally over a very long period of time and has the nickname Dr. Blockchain, and probably call him Dr. RFID as well, because he has a strong standing in that space. And we're just pleased to have all of you here today. I know we've gotten some questions and we want to address those questions up front. And then as more questions are raised, or if you've come to the event with questions, please throw them into the Q&A and we'll go ahead and address those after the panel has their conversation around our current list of Q&A questions. I'm going to turn it over to you, Joe. I know you have gotten a run through of the questions, and I know you always bring us back to the shallow end of the pool. So I'm going to leave it in your capable life-saving hands and look forward to learning with the rest of y'all.
Yeah. So you want me to start answering questions? I'm probably the wrong guy to be answering questions. We got a lot of smart guys here.
Yeah, no, the asking of the questions and sparking the conversation, I think is definitely in your wheelhouse thing. So,
right. Well, I think if one of the things this is my own question. I don't know if I'm supposed to be asking on behalf of somebody else, but one of my questions has always been the same as, what's going to happen if we don't do this?
Ooh.
Who wants to field that?
That is the question.
I can start with, because we kind of hit that in the airline business. We operated for a long time without standards in a very siloed and protected way, which was really made it difficult for us in the long term. But ultimately, the government asked us if they would like for them to come in and regulate us.
How wonderful.
And we quickly realized that was a bad idea. And that was I would have to say that was a driving catalyst in the formation of the standards along and around the equivalent of TUID in the airline industry.
Yep.
If we look at the the current, I mean, we've got a few small operational issues in the trucking and the supply chain world today. I guess one of the questions I've had is that, Andrew, is this now getting to critical mass, similar to the point where did the airline industry do it at a point where they had the same kind of pain as we're seeing right now, or did it have more or less, or what's your take?
Well, that's a good question, and I would say there was a lot of pain. The thing that I think the difference was, I guess, the lobby for those in the middle who didn't want it, much the way we have that lobby in the logistics industry, was strong, but not strong enough to stop it from occurring. And so the airlines really forged ahead because it was too painful for them not to be able to move passengers easily between airlines, with a common unique global ID. in the old days, each of the reservation systems had their own global IDs, and there was no structure to them other than they were unique for that airline. And ultimately, they had to come up with a way for that not to be so they could move between airlines. And the catalyst for that was pressure from multiple sources, including the government, but ultimately the travel agency lobby, who really didn't want it because that, in a lot of ways, removed their hands from the middle of the transaction and their need to be in the middle of the transaction.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Andrew, but what you're saying is, oh my goodness, no brokers? How very.
Is that what I'm saying? I guess that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
In another parlance, yes, and of course we should not forget the underlying thing. And in fact, this very morning I spent a very long time on the phone, very pleasant time, with Dale Christie, the blockchain evangelist of FedEx. And amongst the subjects was basically exponential growth of freight. This is required, Andrew, for the same reason as the airlines suddenly came up against the wall: growth. Right. They could not deal with any further, tickety-boo ticketing without some cohesive polymer that bonded them more tightly and more cohesively than sticky tape on the back of a paper ticket, and flimsy baggage receipts and all the rest of it that we know was abolished quite quickly. So this is that exact same pattern, exact same roadway. It's a roadway this time, not an airway. We can't meet the challenges of transportation today without a TUID. End of discussion for this moment, anyway.
I think we all agree.
And Joe Lynch is talking to nobody because his microphone's off.
I can normally turn it off on time. I don't get it back on time. One of the things I always think about it when you mention the airlines is those are big companies. One of the challenges I think we have is uniting, a very big industry that is small players, big players, some very unique players with certain kind of trucks, specialized trucks. And then, there's companies that do logistics and transportation who don't even call themselves logistics and transportation. So I think we have a pretty high bar to get over on this stuff.
The jargon, Joe, in the airline sector, in maritime shipping, in bus operators, they're always diverse communities of their own speak, which is right. What makes them, it kind of guards them actually in a weird way, because nobody understands what the hell they're talking about if they're not in it. Yes. And in our world, as you know, and Vic, I hope will chime in on this, we've got the 4PLs, the 3PLs, we've got PLs, we've got PLCs, we've got LLCs, we've got break bulk, LTLs, less than load, and we got the parcel carriers, and we got the urban parcel last mile.
John, if you're going to list them all, don't have.
I'm not, Vic. I was giving you plenty of time to gather your thoughts. Go ahead.
There are tons.
Well, I think the key point is that Joe's making is we're not going to get change in any space like this. I mean, historically, part of my interest, my background is business strategies and organizational strategy and operations and so on. Because I was an academic, past tense. But if you look at the history, these things happen because there are some big players who come in and put their shoulder behind the wheel and get it to happen. If we look at the other industries, I mean, yeah, the airlines were big, but in the North American trucking industry specifically, there aren't a lot of big players, either at the carrier level or the broker level, or let alone the DFM level. So the question, part of the strategy of trying to get something changed is to look around and say, okay, who are the big guys in the room? Who do we got? Where are our 350-pound offensive linemen?
Right.
And we don't have a lot. But the ones we do have are the big shippers, the big customers, the big, and we've got this thing called a government. And I just counting heads, and I'm saying we're gonna have to get the engagement of one or multiples of those to actually see anything really happen.
The largest shipper in the United States is the federal government.
Yes. I mean, they wouldn't have to regulate anything. They would only have to say, we won't take inbound shipments that don't have a TUID, and everything that's outbound will have a TUID. And we want to have the confirmation paperwork and reports that come back to us for payment show that TUID. And if they do that, those are the kinds of events that will make it happen.
Yeah, Vic, if that were to occur, if the government said that, we would be done with this.
So the question is, where are the big boys?
Yeah.
And how do we get the big boys to play?
Yeah.
The Walmarts, the Costcos, those are the guys that have to play.
Right. And that's going to take, I mean, the only way I can imagine it is if people of goodwill and understanding in the industry start spreading the word and communicating, but targeting those big boys. Right. Talk to them. Let them hear it from 5 or 6 different places, and then maybe the conversation will start to take off. I think they call it viral.
Yeah, it's very interesting, the idea that if you have, so I'm from automotive, and as soon as you had somebody say, this is what General Motors wants, this is what Ford wants, this is Chrysler wants, they started to say, well, could we consolidate under one standard across all 3 of those? Sure. And that was normal, because otherwise you said, we got a piece of paper that we're filling out very similar, but different. And so they did get together, and it made a lot of sense. And then when they started developing new technologies, they said to the government, hey, do you mind if we collaborate so we don't create 4 different standards, and the Japanese create 4 more and the Europeans create 4 more?
Yes. And that, Joe, that's such a very good point. Of course, the word standard, right. It's my addiction, as you know, and my burden. But of course, we've always driven TUIDs on the absolute understanding that this is a standardized form. This is to be adopted easily and readily by many people, with the comfort and assurance that its form and its origination and its termination fall within a document that is a standards document that clearly denotes a comfort zone to the user that does not exist at this time. Let's get real. What we're not competitive. We're not charging in to get rid of the white horse with a black horse or a Pinto. We're actually charging in with a brand new stable, and all the animals look the same. So it is actually, without doubt, the government that is required. To say we couldn't do it without them, yes, but it wouldn't be in our combined lifetimes. With a simple understanding from the government that this is not a bunch of cowboys, this is not the Wild West, this is a very sensible, sane, professional, coherent collection of persons who have come together, realized that this current practice is wasteful, counterproductive, damaging to the economy. I mean, we know the list that government likes, and government actually has heard it, and the government have nodded, right? But they need to get out the armchair. And I think the fact that, to your point, Joe, about industries that have eventually not only standardized but then gone to the government and said, do you mind if we talk to each other so that nobody, nobody's going to start duplicating. So it is comforting, isn't it, that aside from the use of kanji characters, which are necessary in Japan, the Japanese standard for automotive is exactly the same as the one generated here by the AIAG, the Automotive Industries Action Group. So the Toyota factory in America is operating under the same structures and standards and guidance as the one in Japan. And indeed, the Nissan plant in the UK operates the same way as the Nissan plant in Tennessee, and so many examples. Yep. Enough from me. Thank you.
Speaking of which, I just noticed that our friend Linda here just posted that a port czar did just get assigned by President Biden. to fix the port problem. So
Perhaps,
which
perhaps
will
Linda-
roll over into the trucking problem.
Yes,
yes,
perhaps Linda would be good enough to find her name and whatever about him and post that as well, because that'll be an interesting end point in this conversation. Let's see if we've got a highly qualified, well-aware person who is going to not just change the electronic dock gates, but change the manner in which the dock operates.
exactly. Well, go ahead,
Daniel,
Vic.
I was just looking at the chat. Daniel Troop, I hope that's the correct pronunciation.
Yeah.
Just posted something regarding the government option and what will be acceptable to different people. To me, the money quote is about halfway down, where he says, "So unless the private 500-pound gorilla is loved by everyone, then many competitors will be hesitant to join if there is the slightest sense that the gorilla has an outsized influence or benefit from the network." You mean there's a little paranoia in this industry?
Yeah.
Andrew, you can pick this up again, going back to your airline profile, because you know that at the time that our airline developed these codes, there were no giant airlines. You know, there was like British Caledonian, BOAC, British Overseas Airways, etc., etc. But do you think, Andrew, that in effect, and I'm very mindful of the chat there because this is where I'm going, do you feel then that one would not want to do it in trucking in case we ended up with One World and Sky Team and
Here's the thing. There'll never be one computer reservation system for travel. There never will be. Now, there are leaders in the space. There's a leader in Europe. There's a leader in the United States. Okay, and they have since become very open players and very amenable to dealing with not just their own standards but other people's standards. And you could argue that whether or not they've been forced, but the reality of the situation was growing from hundreds and thousands of connections inter and in between the airlines, the hotels, the car companies, and the untenableness of the maintenance of that and the cost associated with everyone having a connection between each other got to the point where the cost of it, the conversation became, what business is the airline really in? Maintaining a network of connections to move data, or are they actually moving people on airplanes? And ultimately, the sanity and the sane people said, okay, we can't do this way anymore. And that was part of the driver. But I mean, to your point, Amadeus and Galileo in Europe and Sabre, and the like in the United States. And look at Southwest, for example. Southwest doesn't like Sabre. Okay, and they do their own thing. Anyone and everyone can do their own thing. However, there are the standards that ATPCO follows, Airline Tariff Publishing, and everybody interfaces with a TUID called a PNR, or Passenger Name Record Locator. And it's a unique global identifier that allows that reservation to move, so that when flight 123 gets canceled because of a mechanical in Chicago, all of those passengers can be picked up by United and Delta without any big issue at all. And the bags go to the right places, and the people go to the right places. And you can't do that today in the logistics industry.
Your confidence in the airline's ability to reroute people and bags, sir, is comforting, but unfortunately slightly bogus. But that's not.
Well, we can have that conversation later.
Yeah, exactly, Andrew. So, Joe, what do you know?
So one of the things that I know there's people who are going to want to go back to square one. So can somebody describe, the main problem that's out there right now and why we need, we're talking already about the building that coalition or having the government do it. What is the big problem that we're talking about, and why is it getting worse every day?
Well, yeah. Let me give a quick scenario that'll probably illustrate it. Acme Shipping has a load. It's not defined, and I mean, in their minds, it's probably the 30,000 pounds of coiled wire at dock 3. And it's got to go to some place or other. They need a truck. They go on the various different load boards. They call some brokers. They basically stand up and scream, "I need a truck." And they tell everybody. And that load gets put out there. The brokers and the load boards make that visible one way or another to the carriers in the hopes that one of the carriers will say, "Oh, I got a truck down the street and I'll pick it up and I'll take it there." I mean, that's what they're trying to do. The problem you have is that you can broadcast it out easily. But when a truck actually phones in and says, "Yeah, I'm down the street, I'll take it, happy," and you sign it up, you can't remove that load from the rest of the system. All the other people, or many of the other people, may have no idea that that load is already taken and gone. And every marketplace I can think of that's digitized, one of the critical features, I mean, on eBay, when it's sold, it's sold.
Right.
On Airbnb, when it's booked, it's booked. In the trucking industry, when it's sold, nobody knows.
Right.
In the airline business, when you get that last seat, the plane is full.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. And I think, in the logistics business, this came up last time we spoke about this, Vic, on the last webinar, is that sometimes when that load gets put up there, people are walking by the load board in the bullpen and they say, "Oh, that guy needs a truck to Atlanta," or that there's capacity going to Atlanta. People go, "Oh, that's off the board. Ignore that." So we're using human intelligence today, but as soon as everything's digital freight match, which a lot of companies are already doing, how is
you can't.
How is that ever going to
Digital
happen?
freight match today makes it worse, not better.
Right.
Because digital freight match doesn't have the intuition
Right.
that a human broker has.
Right.
Human broker has
they might have made the phone call already and said, "Hey, is that still available?" No, it already went.
They might know the shipper, and they know the shipper, puts up 5 loads every time they have one to go just to get more interest. Humans have all kinds of supporting information.
So the solution is this TUID. So why don't you give us, what is the TUID?
TUID is very simple. It's a method of calculating a string of text, which is an identifier that you assign to the load at the point where you conceive that the load is going to be shipped. And that string is, by the nature of the way it's constructed, is guaranteed to be unique. No other shipper will generate the same string. And therefore, anyone who sees that string knows they're talking about that specific load and no other. And you can pass that string through the system and it can go wherever it's going to go. And it will always mean those 30,000 pounds of coiled wire on dock 2.
Right. So in effect, every shipment becomes its own little special snowflake, and that's a good thing. Right now, we have a whole bunch that say that's the same snowflake on 50 load boards.
Well, we assign unique identifiers when we book the truck. When the truck comes up, I mean, there's all kinds of paperwork with unique identifiers, so no confusion. From the moment you contract with the truck, there's no confusion about what that load is and where it's going. The problem is the confusion in the preceding negotiation phase, when that load is floating out there as an offer all over the intertubes, and
by the time it becomes unique, it's only one trucking company is involved, or 3PL is involved. It's the rest don't know that it's ever even moved,
and the rest have wasted a whole lot of time and energy chasing something, and it's the waste. The other problem that it creates, which is potentially just as serious, is that if you have all of that information out there that are duplicates and confusing, and you don't know which ones are the same and which aren't, how do you decide what supply and demand are?
Right.
right? All the supply and demand signals are
Well, they're artificial.
off. Yeah.
They're all off. Yeah.
They're all off. Now, how do you have a free market if you don't have supply and if you don't know your supply and demand? I'm not sure there's much economic theory that suggests a way to do that.
Right. And I can speak from my own experience. I ran a little third-party logistics company, and I remember sometimes you really struggle to get a load. And even if you don't put it on a load board, you call many people, you send a lot of emails, the information's everywhere. So you know somebody's put it up on a load board. And as soon as you find a truck, you're like, whew, on to the next problem. And you start getting phone calls from people and emails, and you don't care because you already had half your day wasted by that load. You're on to the other business. So there's not even an incentive for that person. And again, I was at third party logistics, no incentive to go fix the problem that I created by talking to half the industry.
That's that, Joe. There shouldn't need to be an incentive to fix it. It shouldn't be broken.
Should happen.
Yeah, right, exactly.
If that load had a unique identifier, calling it the transport unit ID, if it had a unique identifier across the industry, then it would be possible to build systems that would go out to all the players and remove the garbage loads after the fact. We could physically build software and systems to do that. But without the unique identifier, it's not physically possible to know that the load on that board is actually the exact same load as the load on that board. And that's the same as the load that's already been booked.
And the more data we create, the worse it gets.
Amen. Exactly. That is correct.
So the time to fix it is before it gets any worse.
Right. So who would have the ability to create a unique ID? So let's just say I'm a little shipper. I'm maybe a lumberyard or something. I say I only do a few loads here and there. I don't have to get involved, or I don't want to be involved. How do you make sure that
it's if it could be designed a lot of different ways. The way that we proposed as a starting point is such that it's so simple, you could probably do it in an Excel spreadsheet yourself. And you just slap it on your paperwork. This is my TUID. The trick is when you go to a load board to post the load board has to allow a field where you can enter it. Because if they do,
they got to make
you're good to go.
They're going to have to make it required.
That's correct.
Yeah, so, basically the rule is it's dead simple to create. I mean, it's trivial. My son programs and he says he can program the actual construction of the TUID in one line of code in any of 40 different languages. That's not complex. What is complex is you want to have people adopt the attitude that says, if I don't have a TUID, I ask for it. If it really doesn't exist, I create it. If I'm asked for it, I give it. Right. If everybody did that, boom, it would propagate, and it would be now the reference point. Everybody would know that all these different records are actually about the same physical load.
So if we get those, so the idea of we got to get enough people, a critical mass of companies, shippers, carriers, to third-party logistics companies, DFMs, to say, this is just the way it is. That's a required field. And if they start working that way, at some point, somebody's going to say, hey, can you move my load? And they say, you're going to need that unique identifier starting. They'll probably tell them 6 months in advance, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the one way this could work is if you have a major shipper that decides to implement it. I mean, it's one line of code. I mean, they'll probably bury it in their SAP system or their McCloud or their Oracle or whatever. And it just automatically generates, and it's part of their. And when they create the load, their system sends a notification to the prospective customer saying, well, we've created the load. That's not a promise that it's shipped. Just says the load has been created. It's an intention to ship. The recipient now has a code that they can use to cross-reference. They got 20 trucks coming in the gate. Which load are you? Well, you're the bingo. They've got an exact backtrack. So you have a couple of big shippers that offer it as part of their documentation. You get a couple of big customers that say, oh, goody, I'm going to take it. And I want to use it, but then I'm going to ask the drivers coming in the gate whether, and the ones who have it, I'm going to like better than the ones that don't. I don't think it would, if we could get those 500-pound gorillas, I don't think it would take that long before it'd be simpler for everybody in the industry to just support the one field.
Yeah, there's a big question here. So I'll just read what Daniel had to say. And he says, do loads placed on DFMs generally have an expiration date, or do they stay there forever until the DFM itself decides that a 3-month-old load is probably irrelevant?
Can I answer that, Vic?
Yes, please do.
Yep. So yeah. Is there a place for a date, an expiration date? Yes. Is it filled out sometimes? So the load can be put up. And for example, a shipper's got 50 loads of exactly the same load. So they can put up one load and leave it up there, or they can put up 50 loads. If they put up one load with no expiration and just leave it up there, they're going to keep hitting that same load over and over again, right? Which
I've never run across that myself, but from what I understand, that can happen for during harvest, when somebody said, I need 200 trucks over the next month to pick up. To
move the tomatoes out of the
out
of California Valley.
So they post it one time. So what is the challenge with that? You guys speak to that problem for just a second. Well, that's the other side of the problem.
It's the inverse of the same challenge, and it just means that there still needs to be unique IDs on every load. I mean, it's the same problem. So the answer to your question is, people need to put IDs up on loads so that they can be tracked. And I think once they do that, the date stuff will sort itself out.
Right. Because it comes off.
From the anecdotal stuff I've been hearing, I think humans make a lot of decisions around those. Shipper has a load up there. Their loads get picked up fast. So if I see one that's 3 days old, that's almost certainly gone. They make those kinds of human judgments around the process.
They might also send an email or make a phone call. There's, that's one of the things that, again, we have that human manual. So you can't ask DFM, a algorithm all of a sudden to say, make a phone call and ask if that's still alive. It won't do it. It'll just be confused. Humans go, could you call that guy? What the hell's going on here? Or send him an email. Or I've worked with Vic all the time, and he's always leaving stuff up here. You send him that email.
Exactly.
But our technologies won't do that.
I really do.
There is, of course, here an overarching mantra that is a favorite of mine, mainly because I created it. But the Ohio principle, zero human intervention operations, prevails. Yes, at this moment in time, in this primitive logistics sector, Jimmy calls Mary Ellen. Right. But you see, the problem is Danny, the forklift truck driver who loaded the truck on night shift last night, he's gone home, right? He didn't leave the paperwork from the shipping dock to show that it had gone. So she's still got it on her clipboard. So she answers the question truthfully from Jimmy. No, it's still here. No, it isn't. Because why? You've got a lot of players on even the relatively smallest loading dock or receiving dock, because remember, this has a receiving issue related to it as well. And then, so here we are cleaning up, literally overnight, we can clean up the, Danny didn't tell Mary Ellen, who therefore didn't tell Jimmy when he called that it had actually gone. There has to be a gone way of going. And it is actually so curable, so instantaneous. And, your faith, Joe, in our fellow human beings is an expression of true faith. It's also incredibly not true. But, you're very kind. You're a Christian man.
Right. The challenge does become, this has been a business of, and I won't say this in a disparaging way, a business of clerks where there was always put a head on it. We have this problem. It happens every week. Have Tom do it. He's too busy. Do we need another head just to do just that? And that was always the way. And it's not going to be that way going forward. We're having more and more technology automate things. And then
Exactly. And this
You know,
is the only mechanism, incidentally, that can keep up with the rapid adoption of technologies of every kind. Plus, here's the thing, isn't it, Joe? We all know this. Vic certainly knows it, other people. You know, you can tighten it up to your point. You can have a shift person who simply collects the fact that it's gone, right? Unfortunately, you know what they did? They were sure that the load to Oklahoma was in Dock 3, and therefore it's gone, you see. And it went on trailer 60471. When you go and give that in as being the facts of the matter, that unfortunately does not compute, because the in-office computer systems, which the person on the shift doesn't have access to, says, oh no, 60471 was for Tennessee, Knoxville. So that must be what's gone. Aha.
Right.
And off you go down the rabbit hole, Joe.
Yep, I know. So
it's the mixture of, if you have all human systems, you can make it work. If you have all automated systems, you can make it work. When you randomly mix and match, not so much.
Right. So we got a follow-up question, and I think it kind of starts speaking to the solution. So it says, you may need this is from Daniel, you may need a load type in addition to the load ID so that it would be labeled unique or recurring. And perhaps once a recurring load is filled, a serial number, it's assigned. And I think what this is getting to, and maybe what you guys could speak to this, is kind of speaking to the solution. And I think the idea you guys had communicated to me was, let's get a team together of everybody in the industry and decide what makes the most sense. Is that where we're,
there's two parts to, there's two levels of the problem. Without a unique identifier, almost no automated solution is possible. With a unique identifier, I wouldn't build, for example, unique or recurring into the identifier. I'd simply have the identifier and hang another variable called that is unique or recurring, and I'd associate it with it. So they go together as a package. And you can have a whole pile of other variables. And as we get other variables, then we get other solutions and other services and other systems. That's the level that can then be constructed and built by all kinds of participants, not just.
Right. And I think what I was getting to is this idea of DFM isn't trying to say this is what everyone must do. They're saying, let's get a team together and say, we TUID is what we need, that unique identifier. But we don't want to make all the rules. We want the industry to make all the rules. And the goal right now is let's get the right people in the room so we can do that. And I think you used the Vic, when Vic was trying to get some ideas through my thick skull, I said, it's like you're building the road in the car and you're driving for now, but you're willing to sit in the back seat at some point.
Well, the elements that are required, we've talked already about needing the 500-pound gorillas of some description to get this moving. The technology itself, the core technology, the TUID, is minimal. I mean, it really is not, that's not a challenge. But what is critically important, especially when you add these other uses, you want to add other variables. You want to start tracking. You want to start, sending it to factors. You want to send it. You want to start doing all these cool, good stuff that the airline industry has been doing for a decade or two. Then you have to have a whole different level of industry participation and governance. I mean, you can't have, we're DFM Data Corp. What we've tried to do is create and lay down the basic framework as a starting point. You have to have something to start the discussion. But at the end of the day, all systems like this, and John can speak to it, end up following some variation of a standards process where it is industry governed. It's some kind of a semi-democratic system where the industry participants come in, they have votes, they have working groups that work up technical solutions and propose them to the membership. Everyone I can think of. John, is there anything that works that doesn't work that way?
I would say First of all, we've got to be rather careful. We'll unsettle people by saying variations of standards. No, but there are certainly, what would I call it, that standards do get reviewed every 4 or 5 years. And in the revisions, it is quite often that the technology's moved on, the methodology's changed. So you do get, in effect, you have to reference sometimes things like XX standard bracket 2017, close bracket. And then we always try and put in an informative annex that says, this is what changed, stay cool, you don't need to do this, or you can opt in or out of this additional feature, reduced feature, whatever. So yeah, yes, Vic, there isn't a perfect standard. It has a little bit of Roman mosaic about it at the end of the day. But here's what's the good news. All the tiles stick together.
Yeah. Andrew, in the airline industry, the vehicle that they use there is basically a corporation, is it not?
Yeah, ATPCO is a corporation. Ultimately, the expiration of what to call the framework, and structure took a while, but ultimately a corporation structure seemed the most practical, and that's what it became. And it's actually became a for-profit organization, but it's owned by the airlines, and it's owned by the car companies, and it's owned by the hoteliers. So it's actually owned by the people who use it.
Yeah, and that model is a very, what I'm thinking about is the airline industry with the technology changes that are occurring needs to be extremely agile in adapting to these kinds of changes. I mean, there's so many opportunities to grab hold of. I would expect the same kind of pace of change to be relevant to the logistics industry. So therefore, it might be the airline industry of creating a corporation, just because it's a more agile, certainly more agile than a government agency. And that's sort of the model that we've been exploring is creating something like that. But that, your mileage may vary.
I have to say that Daniel, he is talking about, as he calls it, IoT, but it's actually AIDC technology, automatic identification and data capture, which is a fundamental part of the Ohio principle. But sadly, I quote, to make sure they stick an RFID tag on a load. The automation has now arrived at such a point where the tags are applied by a machine as well. They never used to be able to be because they were too fragile. But now we do high-speed applicators for tags, and we make them fit in the right angle and don't mar the packaging and so much more. And of course, it does come with the kind of hardware structure that automatically transmits data. So for instance, to pick up Daniel's excellent point, but to relate it to our subject of the day, the first carton going on that truck would have an RFID tag that has the TUID on it, therefore triggering the entire TUID dispersal, resolution, etc. Oh my goodness, the amount of simultaneous info streams you would create, Vic, that would, the parties to the transaction would just be beaming, just like Joe Lynch is, and thinking, oh my goodness, let's this is just wonderful.
That would open up tons of innovators. I mean, a whole ecosystem of companies could spring up, entrepreneurs to take advantage of the fact that the TUID exists.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Then they can tie it together in all kinds of weird and wonderful ways, and they can go out and sell it and make gazillions of dollars.
If I could add one thing to that, one of the reasons that the conversation kind of triggered this thought in my mind. Yesterday, I was talking to somebody, and they were talking about measuring and saying, well, who's a good shipper, who's a bad shipper, right? And the trucking companies want to know that. And we started saying, we want Yelp for trucking, right? I want to know, do I want to go to that location and pick up? Well, one of the challenges we have is, again, the data isn't in a place where you can say that data is in a silo. But again, if you said, hey, this is potentially information that's available, because it's all anonymous, obviously.
Well,
I would venture, I guess that's a subject for another
but
podcast.
no, I know. I was just, but you mentioned entrepreneurs, and I thought, yeah,
well,
it's
the one comment I would make is that that's a subject for that's a problem that is specific, that is really entrenched in the spot market.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have a bespoke set of carriers and they've allocated 20 trucks, et cetera, then a lot of those questions about ratings and so on could be handled another way.
Right.
The spot market, where you get random trucks and random loads, that's where you really you would really like to have ratings,
right.
But that's where right now it's probably physically impossible to generate.
Right. Well, it really is the only reason I brought that up is just when you brought up the idea that there's all these new opportunities. Yeah, there are. So I think Linda's back for a reason. So you can
I do want to respect everybody's time, but this has been intriguing to listen to all of your guys' insights. And we are planning on having a follow-on event on the 14th. And the focus of that is going to be to discuss the transaction mile markers. We've talked about kind of the Genesis block, right? The TUID needing to be in place for true digitalization to occur. But what are those points along the way that you guys were talking about? You can track that shipment through these series. What should those be? How do standards play into that conversation? And who's going to be helping make those decisions for the industry? So we actually have consistency. So we deal with some of these security issues. There's so much to discuss. And I want to give each of you just a quick, maybe minute, if you don't mind. Where do you see the industry in 2 years with the TUID or without the TUID? I didn't throw anybody that question earlier, so everybody's hearing this for the first time. So
I'm gonna do it first, Linda, because as you know, I am visionary.
You are.
The problem is, of course, as you know, with my vision is I should actually be wearing glasses. But continuing now that I have the benefit of glasses, it's as simple as this in a minute. Where is it in 2 years? It has to be somewhere other than where it is today. It's as simple as that. Otherwise, oh my goodness, you're going to start to see what's happened in shipping, which wasn't ready for the sea change, literally SEA and sea change, that has left us now with the port czar, whose task, it says, is to look at why it's 4 to 10 times more to ship something. When you see the American consumer's attitude to a 1 cent price hike, wait till they start getting hit with $1 a box, because that's how much the trailer load has gone up. So that's it. That's how it's going to be. Yeah, best to go tackle it properly now than be imposed on, because Andrew knows this quite simply will become a government, especially this administration's pet child. Oh, we'll save the consumer by regulating trucking. Oh, thanks. Bye.
I would say in the next 24 months, there's going to have to be a significant move toward implementing this, because the industry will be forced to do so, because the government emphasis on this is going to push, the Walmarts and the Costcos to want to do this for the right reasons. And I think to the point that's been made earlier by Vic, that once you get one to turn, they're all going to turn. I think we're going to see one turn in 24 months.
Yeah, if I could add something, because I don't want to be last, because that's the Vic back cleanup. But one of the things that we just got through with the ELD mandate, which was for electronic logging device and for hours of service, and I've talked to a number of people. We had some advancements because of the ELD. We now have visibility that we might not otherwise have. But has it saved lives? Has it made trucking safer? There's a lot of people would argue, no, all it did was take out 4% of the capacity of the market. People can debate whether that was a wonderful law or not. You won't ever hear truckers say, yeah, I feel safer and I'm sleeping better. That didn't happen. So we had this long push to get this law through, and a lot of delays on it. And they tried to do the best they could to get all the cats herded. but it wasn't good. And the problem is it was top down. And I think what you guys are mandating, and not mandating, what you guys are suggesting is, let's not wait for the government mandate. Let's do it ourselves.
Yep.
And we don't have to, hammer that square peg through the round hole.
I'll give you my answer. I think it'll come down to the mechanics, which is, do we get the ear and the thoughts and the mind share of the necessary big gorillas enough to get this to go? I think the idea is clear, it's obvious, and it's there's tremendous precedent for it in virtually every other industry and everywhere in digitization. If it's software, it already does this. So it's a case of getting that attention and then getting the big boys to push behind it. And then the mechanics are really straightforward. So when I flip the coin, the coin flip is, do we get that support? Do we find the people who will listen long enough to have the light bulb go off?
Yeah, and hopefully we'll have the opportunity on the 14th to speak.
We
with
just
more
keep
of them.
doing this kind of thing and hope that the audience will talk to other people, share the podcast, reach out to us, talk to us, read anything to keep the conversation and to get it to go and to get the interest level up so that we can have meaningful movement.
Yeah, it's a necessary conversation to keep having. So thank you guys for participating in it. Look forward to the audience's engagement going forward and seeing you all on the 14th.
Yeah.
So
thank you so much.